we dive into the life of the most cold-blooded cannibal in American history, Albert Fish, a man who began his trail of blood at the age of 40 and only grew more brutal with time. He was a monster who hid behind the mask of a harmless grandfather, while claiming that God himself commanded him to commit these atrocities. Born on May 19, 1870, in Washington, he entered a world that was already fading for his father. His father, Randall Fish, was already 75 years old. His mother was 43 years younger, a gap that signaled a strange start to a life of deviance. By the age of 5, the little boy lost his father. Suddenly, at a train station, left in the cold grip of poverty, his mother made a choice that would scar his soul forever. She sent him to St. John's orphanage, a place where the air was heavy with despair. From the age of 7 to 9, Albert lived in a cycle of unrelenting torment. The cruel sting of the lash and the shameful shadows that stole his innocence became his only reality. In the shadows of that orphanage, a deep, dark hunger for pain was born. He began to realize that the suffering gave him a twisted sense of pleasure. In 1879, his mother took him back, but it was too late. The 10-year-old boy who returned was no longer a child. A monster was already growing inside him, waiting for the right moment to strike. In 1884, Albert left Washington behind and moved to the cold, gray streets of New York. He tried to build a life as a painter, blending into the shadows of the city. At his mother's insistence, he married a woman 9 years younger than him in 1898. Together, they brought 6 children into a world of poverty and despair. But the fragile peace of that home was about to be shattered. After the birth of the 6th child, his wife suddenly abandoned the family, running away with another man. She took everything, leaving the children with nothing, not even a bed to sleep on. Alone and desperate to provide, Albert turned to theft, a path that led him straight to prison. But the iron bars did not reform him. They only fed the beast growing inside. His years behind bars pushed his sexual perversions to a boiling point. He began to seek pleasure in ways that defy human nature. His sadomasochistic acts became an obsession, specifically his ritual with needles. He would drive long metal needles deep into his own groin, leaving them to vanish beneath his skin. When he was finally caught, doctors were stunned to find 29 needles permanently embedded in his flesh. By 1910, the 40-year-old Albert was ready to spill blood. He targeted Thomas Cadden, a 19-year-old man with a mental disability. Albert raped the young man and then savagely slaughtered him. The monster had tasted blood, and his hunger was only beginning to grow. 1924, Staten Island. The summer sun was setting on the innocence of 8-year-old Francis McDonald. He was playing in front of his house, unaware that a shadow was watching from the edge of the woods. A man with pale gray hair and eerie, piercing eyes walked past the house. When he saw Francis's mother watching, he tipped his hat with a polite smile, a gesture of kindness that hid a pure evil. For 30 minutes, the old man stood in the shadows, watching the children play. Then, he called Francis over. The boy walked toward him and vanished into the trees. When the search party found him, the scene was beyond devastating. Francis was lying under a tree, his small body savagely beaten. The monster had used the boy's own belt to strangle the life out of him. The sallow, thin, gray-haired man had vanished into the mist, leaving the police to wonder how such a frail old man could possess such brutal strength. 1920s. New York was a city of fear. Small children were disappearing, and the gray man was nowhere to be found. On February 11th, 1927, the nightmare returned for 4-year-old Billy Gaffney. He was playing in a hallway with a 3-year-old friend when a figure emerged from the darkness. When Billy's father asked where his son had gone, the toddler's reply sent a chill through the entire city. The boogeyman took him. The child described the kidnapper as a tall, thin, gray-haired man with a gray mustache. It was the same description from the murder 3 years ago. But the police were blind, failing to connect the dots between the two cases. Billy's body would never be found. Years later, Fish would reveal the unthinkable truth in a cold, flat voice. He had taken the boy to a deserted room in Brooklyn. He tortured him, slaughtered him, and ate his flesh. The monster was still hiding in plain sight, and he was already looking for his next meal. Six years had passed. The shadows of the gray man still haunted the heavy air of New York. But in 1928, a family's desperation met a monster's hunger. The Budd family, struggling in the grip of poverty, posted a simple ad looking for work for their son, Edward. But instead of a benefactor, they invited a predator into their home. Albert Fish arrived at their door, calling himself Frank Howard. He looked like a harmless, frail, elderly gentleman. But when 10-year-old Grace Budd walked into the room, his eyes lit up with a demonic fire. Fish was hypnotized by her innocence. He tricked the parents with a smile, promising to take Grace to a birthday party. The parents, seeing only a kind grandfather, trusted him. They watched their little girl walk away, hand in hand with the devil. She never came back. For 6 long years, there was only a soul-crushing silence, until November 12th, 1934. A letter arrived at the Budds' door that would freeze the blood of the entire nation. It wasn't a ransom note. It was a menu. In cold, precise, clinical detail, Fish described the unthinkable. He told them how he took Grace to a deserted house in Westchester, how he stripped her, how she cried for her mother, and how he strangled the life out of her. But the horror did not end with her death. The gray man wrote that he butchered her small body, and over the course of 9 days, he ate her. He described her flesh as sweet and tender. The Budd family collapsed into a nightmare from which they would never wake up. The boogeyman was no longer a myth. He was real. He was hungry. And he was finally ready to be caught. Detective William King, a man who refused to let a little girl's ghost rest in peace. For 6 long years, he stared at a cold file, waiting for the monster to make one single mistake. And finally, the boogeyman slipped up. The envelope that carried that hellish letter had a faint, embossed seal. NYPCBA, the New York Private Chauffeurs Benevolent Association. King followed the paper trail like a bloodhound scenting its prey. It led him to a small, dusty rooming house in the heart of Manhattan. The landlady looked at the description, and her eyes widened in recognition. "That's Albert Fish," she said. The phantom that haunted the city's nightmares finally had a name. Fish was a creature of habit, a predator who couldn't help but return to the scene. He came to that house every month to collect his son's military checks. December 13th, 1934. The trap was set, and the air in the hallway was thick with tension. King waited in the shadows, his hand steady on his service weapon. When the frail, gray-haired man appeared, King stepped into the light. "Albert Fish?" he asked, his voice like cracking ice. The old man nodded, but his eyes suddenly flared with a demonic intensity. In a flash, Fish pulled a straight razor from his pocket, lunging at the detective. But the law was faster. King gripped the old man's wrist, twisting it until the blade clattered to the floor. The boogeyman was finally in custody. But the true horror was only beginning to be unveiled. When Edward Budd saw him at the station, he pointed a trembling finger. "That's him," he whispered. "That's the man who stole my sister." The mask of the kind grandfather was gone. Now the world would see the pure evil of Albert Fish. The interrogation room was heavy with a smell that wasn't just dust. It was the stench of pure evil. Detective King watched the frail 66-year-old man as he began to speak in a voice like cracking bones. Fish didn't just confess, he revealed a map of blood that spanned across the entire country. "I have a child in every state," he boasted, a claim that sent shivers through the heart of the nation. But the most graphic evidence was hidden inside his own body. Doctors ordered an X-ray, and what they saw on the screen defied human reason. 29 sewing needles, driven deep into his groin and abdomen. He had lived with this metal shrapnel inside him for years, a twisted ritual of penance for his sins. March 11th, 1935. The trial that New York would never forget began. His lawyers tried to hide the monster behind a mask of madness. The famous psychiatrist, Dr. Frederick Wortham, spoke of a mind consumed by dark hallucinations. Fish believed he was like Abraham, commanded by God to sacrifice his own children. To him, eating the flesh of the innocent was a holy communion. But the jury looked at the small bones of Grace Budd, and they saw no room for mercy. On March 22nd, the verdict echoed through the silent courtroom. Guilty. Albert Fish didn't flinch. He didn't cry. Instead, a disturbing smile touched his lips. He looked at the judge and whispered that he was happy to taste the ultimate pleasure of death. January 16th, 1936. Sing Sing Prison, New York. At 66 years old, the boogeyman walked toward the electric chair with a steady, calm step. There was no fear in his eyes, no tears on his face. He sat on Old Sparky and reportedly helped the executioner fasten the leather straps to his own legs. He looked at the witnesses and whispered his final, twisted truth. It will be the ultimate thrill, the only one I haven't tried yet. He believed that death was just another sinful pleasure to be tasted. At 11:09 p.m., the switch was thrown, and the current surged through his frail body. A legend was born that night, that the needles embedded in his flesh caused the chair to short circuit. The story said blue sparks flew from his body like a demonic fire, But the truth was colder. He simply died, like any other monster. The Boogeyman was gone. He took his most shameful secrets and his final confession note to an unmarked grave. Albert Fish left behind a legacy of pure horror that still makes the world tremble today. Sleep well tonight, if you can. I am Redbeard, and this was the story of the Gray Man.